Hello, Lena here, and today we are going to explore what is the recommended daily intake we need across a range of food groups. We'll also explore how we can include a wide variety of foods into our day. To do this, we have Luke from Daley Nutrition joining us. So first thing we need to cover is, what do we mean when we talk about recommended daily intake? To do that, I'm going to hand it over to Luke, who will introduce himself and introduce us to recommended daily intake. So, over to you, Luke.
Thanks, Lena, and I'm really happy to help out and offer some support on guidance and nutrition. So my name's Luke, I'm a registered nutritionist and also a university lecturer, so I spend a lot of my time researching food and why it's so beneficial for the body and how you can incorporate a wide variety of different types of foods into your diet. So in answer to your question, Lena, yes, we have these recommended dietary intake of food groups in Australia that are unique to Australia and well researched and evidence-based, such as whole grains, meats, legumes, pulses, beans, dairy and dairy alternatives, fruits and vegetables, but also making sure we're getting enough hydration spread throughout the day.
Thanks for that, Luke. Now that we know a little bit more about what we mean when we're talking about the recommended daily intake, we'll now talk about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Guide to Healthy Eating. So, rumour has it that our diet is one of the best traditional diets in the world. So I'm going to hand it back over to Luke, who's going to explain what it is about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander diet that makes it so amazing. So, Luke, over to you.
Thanks, Lena. Well, the traditional diet of any country tends to be the healthiest diet of that country. But in Australia, if you look at the traditional Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander diet, we're sort of passing back about 40,000 years here. There are some very important key characteristics of that diet that lead to a lot of health benefits. So we're looking at a staple of basically lots of roots and tubers that are locally sourced, such as bush yams and wild potatoes, wild onions, but also looking at locally sourced fruits that are seasonal, and also the flowers of the fruits as well, which contain nectar and actually a rich source of vitamin C, as well as locally sourced seeds and nuts that can be ground down into different types of flours and made into different types of foods such as bread. If you're looking at the sources of protein, they're very, very lean, such as your kangaroo. We're looking at locally sourced seafood and locally sourced sea animals that are a rich source of polyunsaturated fatty acids that lead to important improvements in reduction of inflammation and a reduction of diseases such as type 2 diabetes. Now, one very key component of the traditional Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander diet is the amount of plant-based foods that was consumed, which means there's a very, very high fibre intake, and we know from a wide variety of research that an increase in fibre is naturally going to improve your health, in particular your digestive health. So if you're looking at the traditional origins of it, it is a wonderful diet to follow and to copy from, really.
Wow, no wonder our mob have always been so fit and healthy. Just take a look at our traditional diet. So, now that we know a little bit more about the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Guide to Healthy Eating, we're going to deep dive and unpack the certain food groups within that. So, we'll start off with grains. So that includes things like rice, pastas, cereals, and breads. And what I'll do is I'll get Luke to explain what are the benefits of including grains in your day and what is the recommended daily intake for this. And what else I'd be really curious to know is there any benefits to choosing wholemeal grains? So, Luke, over to you.
Alright, let's explore grains. That's a really good question. So there's a variety of different types of grains that we can access in 21st century Australia. Some of these grains contain rich sources of magnesium and a whole variety of different types of B vitamins that basically help us to produce energy. So what you said, Lena, is basically we're after whole grains. So whole grains are foods that contain the whole grain, such as oats, for example. Or if we're having bread, we're looking at whole grain bread, which has got the whole grain wheat in it. Or if we're having something like rice, we want brown rice, ideally more than white rice, because the whole grain gives us the dietary fibre that we're after. And as I said before, the more fibre that we have, the better the health benefits. So if you're going to start your day off, we'll probably look at something maybe like porridge, which has got whole grain oats in there, followed by maybe some whole grains for lunch, such as some wholemeal breads or whole grain bread, and then for dinner, maybe some wholemeal pasta or some brown rice or seeds such as quinoa, which is a really good source of protein. So one common misconception, unfortunately, that we have with grains and cereals is that they can lead to weight gain, such as bread, pasta, etc. And that's not necessarily the case. So what we know about stuff like oats and breads and pastas and cereals is that they're a rich source of carbohydrates, and carbohydrates is your preferred energy store, which is the form of glycogen. And glycogen and also glucose is very good for fueling the muscles and fueling the brain. So something we would never cut out of your diet, but what we would do is recommend certain servings. So what we're after for dinner time is ideally a quarter of your plate filled with some sort of rich source of carbohydrate, whether that's a whole grain or something like potato, for example. But if you're looking at specific servings for the day, then most people will do quite well between 4 to 6 servings of whole grains and cereals, with one serving being approximately a slice of bread, or if you're looking at porridge, half a cup of cooked porridge or rice or pasta.
Awesome, thanks for that, Luke. So now let's move on to the next food group, which is veggies/beans and legumes. So the recommended daily intake for veggies is 5. So Luke, what I would really like to know is, how do we know we're getting 5 serves, and what does this really mean? So what are those things that we can be doing to smash our veggie intake? So Luke, I'll hand it over to you.
This is one of my favourite food group sections, Lena. So what we're trying to do is incorporate a minimum of 5 vegetables into our diet every day, with males needing actually 6 servings. So a serving is approximately 1 cup of leafy green vegetables such as spinach or kale, or if we're looking at something a little bit heavier like a carrot or pumpkin, sweet potato, we're looking at half a cup as a serving. So if you're looking at a guide, you're looking at more than 2 to 2.5 cups of vegetables per day to achieve what you actually need to get. Now, what we need to incorporate is a variety of colours. For example, carrots give us beta-carotene, which offer a rich source of vitamin A when it gets inside our body. Very good for trapping bacteria and immunity. Stuff like onions give us some nutrients like quercetin, which is great for liver function. Peas give us some iron, a plant-based source of iron, as well as vitamin C, and actually frozen can be really cost-effective as well. The key is to try and incorporate them into every meal if we can, being lunch and dinner as a priority. Now in Australia we tend to consume a lot of ham and cheese toasties for lunch, but if we actually introduced a salad, or we added some salad into our sandwich or rolls, we could easily get 2 to 3 servings into the lunch quite quickly, and that will improve your blood pressure across the afternoon, as well as getting you some vitamin C. Now when we come to dinner time, what we aim for is half your plate filled with vegetables, whether they're roasted, stir-fried, steamed or air-fried, to try and incorporate at least 2 to 3 different servings, and that will give you a range of benefits whilst you're sleeping, such as those reduction in blood pressure, but also a very strong reduction in anti-cancers or anti-cancer properties. So the key thing is to try and build a relationship with food. Don't eat them because you have to, eat them because you enjoy them. And that's where oils like extra virgin olive oil come into play, because you can cook them in oils to amplify the taste and the flavour, and then you get all those beautiful monounsaturated fats from those oils as well. So the key is variety and different colours, and building a relationship to aim for about 5 or 6 servings per day.
Thanks for that, Luke. Let's move on to the next food group, which is fruit. So the recommended daily intake for fruit is 2. But how do we know what that really means? Surely eating 2 strawberries isn't the same as eating 2 apples or a whole watermelon. And what does it mean if we drink fruit juice or have dried fruit? Are these also included in our fruit intake? Luke, can you help us out a little bit? I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Lena. So it's recommended that we have 2 different types of fruit per day, such as an orange and as a banana, for example. Now, in terms of fruit, what we're after is for you to eat the whole thing, obviously peel it first, and then eat the fleshy part of that fruit, compared to you squeezing it and getting the juice out of it. So as I mentioned before, eating fibre helps for you to feel a bit fuller for longer after meals. But also, if we're actually eating fruit on a regular basis, we get a good source of vitamin C, potassium. But berries are worth a particular focus on, in particular blueberries, because they contain something called anthocyanins, and anthocyanins are very good for activating parts of your brain, so actually reduce cognitive decline and very good for brain function. So in summary, yes, we need 2 servings a day, and ideally have that as your snack compared to you having maybe a chocolate bar or a cereal bar.
Thanks for that, Luke. Okay, so up next is dairy and other alternatives. So this includes things like milks, cheeses and yogurts, and other alternatives as well. I guess when we think of dairy, we always think about our bone health, but what other benefits are there to including dairy into your day? And what about those people who are lactose intolerant? How can they make sure that they're meeting their recommended daily intake for dairy? Luke, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a really important food group section, and actually one of the biggest complications that we have in Australia, in particular females, is calcium consumption. Now we know that calcium is very good for your bones, helps your bones to form, but what we also get from dairy is something called vitamin D. Now vitamin D is a fat-soluble nutrient which is very important for basically capturing calcium inside our digestive tract. So if you're low in vitamin D, you don't absorb calcium very effectively. Now, if we're looking at bones in particular, the bones that tend to fracture and we have complications with tends to be the hip and the knee joints. And we tend to see that a lot more over the age of 50 when women hit menopausal stages. In fact, calcium intake goes up by an extra 300 milligrams per day over the age of 50 or when you hit menopausal. Now, let's look at some rich sources of calcium. So a tub of yogurt, approximately 200 grams, gives us about a third of our calcium intake for the day. A glass of milk gives us a third of our calcium intake. And roughly about 30 grams or a matchbox size of cheese will give us a third of what we need. Now if you are over the age of 50 or menopausal, you need to go up slightly higher. So it might be worth talking to your doctor about a supplement, but certainly you would not want to cut out dairy or alternatives from your diet. Now if we're looking in particular plant-based source, fortified soy milk will be the best alternative to cow's milk. But when you are looking at soy milk, make sure that you're looking that it's got vitamin D that's fortified and calcium as well. So these are an integral part of our diet and something that we should never take for granted.
Okay, cool. So let's move on to the next food group, which is protein. So this includes foods such as lean meats, poultry, fish, eggs, tofu, nuts and seeds. I think I've got them all. And I guess when we do think about protein, we always think about how that helps us to build muscle. But Luke, what I'd like to know is what are the other health benefits of including protein in your day? And what is the recommended daily intake for this food group? The other thing that I'm really curious to know is, are there some foods that have more protein in it than others? And what about vegetarians? How can they make sure that they're getting enough protein in their day if they don't eat meat?
Thanks, Lena. There's some really great questions there. So what we're looking at here, yes, are foods that contain protein. So we're looking at lean meats, poultry, fish, eggs, tofu, nuts and seeds, and beans and legumes. So a serving roughly is about 2 servings for a female and 2.5 servings for a male. Now depending on how much you exercise or if you want to build some muscle, this might change and vary slightly. But according to the guidelines, it's approximately 65 grams worth of red meat is a serving, or 120 grams worth of fish, 85 grams worth of white meat, 1 cup of beans and legumes, or 170 grams of tofu. Okay. So if you're looking at the plant-based vegetarian sources, you'll have to consume more volume or more weight compared to you having maybe 65 grams worth of kangaroo. Now what sort of nutrients do we find in these foods? We get iron, so obviously red meat gives us hemoglobin iron. If we're looking at fish, we get a rich source of polyunsaturated fatty acids such as omega-3. And in fact, if you're looking at the traditional indigenous diet from 40,000 years ago, there was a lot higher consumption of fish and sea animals, which contains more omega-3, which is very, very important for heart health and reduction of a range of chronic diseases. But also incorporated into that is obviously stuff like peanut butter and almonds and any other type of nut that you enjoy. But if you're comparing, let's say, tofu to red meat, you've got to consume 170 grams of tofu to get the equivalent protein that you would get within a serving of meat, for example. Now, in terms of nutrients, we're looking at iron. Zinc is a very rich source in any sort of animal products, but also beans and legumes. And also we're looking at dietary fiber from stuff like kidney beans and chickpeas, etc. So there's some wonderful nutrients to be had from this food group, and it's something we need to incorporate into our meals every single day.
Okay, so the last thing we're going to cover is sometimes foods. So this includes things like lollies, chocolate, takeaway, alcohol, all things like that. And the reason that they're considered sometimes food is because they add next to no nutritional value, and we don't actually need them to help our body to function. So Luke, what I'm wondering is, if we don't actually need them, why have they been included in our recommended daily intake? And what is the recommended daily intake for sometimes food? And how can we make sure that we don't go overboard with sometimes foods? So Luke, what do you think?
Right, Lena, let's explore sometimes foods, also called discretionary choices, or those indulgent foods that we tend to have during the week. So these incorporate donuts and chocolates and cakes and biscuits and sugary drinks. And yes, they taste delicious and they're designed to taste delicious. They contain more sugar, fat and salt than the foods we've already spoke about today, which is why they're a little bit indulgent. So what we need to be is a little bit more mindful about when we're having them. So frequency is a big topic for this. Are you having it every day, every week, every month, every fortnight? So there's different contexts. So let's say we're having a donut every day. It's probably something that we don't really need every day. And definitely we don't want to be replacing a donut for a piece of fruit, for example. However, if you go buy a donut shop, once a fortnight and you fancy a donut, that's really not going to cause you too many problems. Same with the example would be sugary drinks. If we're having sugary drinks instead of water, that's going to add a lot of sugar and extra energy into our day that we probably don't need. So we might need to switch that for water as an alternative. Sugary drinks such as Powerade really don't need to be taken into consideration unless you're exercising for prolonged periods of time, over an hour. Now let's talk about chocolate, which is a very unique food, as we know. Now actually 100 grams of dark chocolate a week can actually give us some benefits to reducing our blood pressure. So if you're going to be smart about sometimes food, I'd definitely move you into the dark chocolate territory to get some sort of flavour and a bit of texture that you want of a chocolatey taste. Now if we're looking at, let's say, cakes and biscuits and pies, which obviously we don't consume every day, we might have those at parties, which is absolutely fine. We don't have a party every day. Now, junk food, in particular takeaway food, is something that we do need to be quite mindful of. Are we replacing home-cooked meals with takeaway options? So usually in Australia, 2 to 3 times a week we might have a takeaway, and that can increase the risk factor of certain chronic diseases depending on the food that you're bringing home. So it might be worth looking at the takeaways and finding a healthier alternative that you can cook at home. But certainly we wouldn't exclude these particular foods out of your diet, because you're more likely to crave them and want them more. So just plan out when you're going to have them during the week, and just appreciate that they're probably not going to support your health as well as having the other nutritious foods we spoke about today. So I hope that answers some of your questions today, Lena, and thank you so much for letting me to explore this with you today.
Thanks for joining us today, Luke, and helping us explore recommended daily intake and how each food group plays such a vital role in our overall health. We encourage you to reflect on what you eat in a day and how you can include a wide variety of food groups onto your plate. Thanks for hanging out with us and getting weller together. See you soon!